Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. Today we're going to create a free mixing course for you because you voted. We have over 2,000 votes on our community tab and you said you wanted a free mixing and mastering course. So this video is for you. What I promise you in this course is to make mixing completely simple. We're not going to overcomplicate stuff. I will go into advanced topics, but I will make sure that I always lead you back to the fundamentals of something. So if I ever go complex, I'll lead you back to the fundamental understanding so I don't just talk way over your head. Okay, so I want you to like the video, like this playlist, save the playlist, share with your friends, do all those social currency things. I appreciate you. As a thank you, we're really trying to reach 1 million subscribers. That's like my next goal. So please, I just want to give you as much as I can for free. Okay, so let's hop into FL Studio and I'll show you how to use some EQ. So today's video is about EQ. So I'm going to start with what's called a sawtooth. A sawtooth, before I even describe what it is, let me show you what it is in this plugin called Wave Candy. So a sawtooth has a lot of harmonic content. Okay, so I'm going to show you a graph you probably have never seen in FL. This is called Wave Candy. So when I speak, notice how, so these are frequencies from top to bottom, from 20 hertz, the low frequencies, all the way to the high frequencies. Notice when I say S, the S occupies a lot of frequencies. It's not just one frequency. A lot of us were taught that when we speak, it's at one frequency, 432, 440. You're not speaking with one frequency. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. Now, the fundamental frequency of all sound is a sine wave. It plays one frequency. Now, these are things called upper harmonics, to where we can multiply what's called a fundamental frequency. A fundamental frequency is the lowest frequency of a sound. Let's say that number is arbitrarily 100 hertz. Every duplication of 100 is what's called a harmonic. So 100 hertz times 2 is the second harmonic. That makes that 200 hertz. Times 3 is 300 hertz. Times 4, 400, on and on and on and on, until you just continue upward. Those are called upper harmonics. And the way you shape them is called overtone. Okay, so that's what people mean by tone. Now with EQ, what you can do is shape the tone of something. You can determine how much energy goes to which frequency portion of a sound. Because again, a sound is not just one frequency. So this is the fundamental thing I just wanted to show you today. So notice how when I speak, it's all over the place. If I zoomed in, you would know that you can see it goes up and down. That little yellowness, that's the intensity of where I'm speaking. So when I say S's, my intensity is in a higher frequency. When I say O, okay, the frequencies are way lower when they're yellow. That's the intensity. Okay, now that you understand that, let's show you a sawtooth. That's a sawtooth wave. It has so many harmonics that it fills up a lot of frequency content. We're going to work with the sawtooth because we're going to do what's called subtractive EQ. This is the strongest EQ format you can understand to begin with, because most of us, when we think EQ, we think boosting. What happens if we cut for the EQ? Let's go to our sawtooth. And let's pull up parametric EQ2. Now, what I'm going to do is show you stock stuff, and then I'm going to get more advanced as we go. My favorite EQ is the FabFilter Q3. It just does so much. And I'll just keep it to those two. You really don't need anything else. Okay, so FabFilter is not free, by the way. It doesn't come with the DAW. So the main thing here is that FL has a stock EQ, but it's static. Okay, it's not dynamic. And the difference between a static EQ and a dynamic EQ is a static EQ, when you make a change, it stays there unless you automate something. So let's show you what that means. So here's a sawtooth. Down here, we have what's called a fundamental frequency. It's the first hill of the sound. Let's make this a little bit bigger because we don't need the browser, do we? I don't think so. Let's make this a lot bigger so you can see. So this first hill, I'll call it a hill, is called a fundamental frequency. This is where the sound has its root. And then we have harmonics to multiply that root. So if I boost this, you'll hear more of a sine wave type tone. That boomy type tone. That bassy rumble type tone. That's the fundamental frequency. Now the second little hill here is the second harmonic. This is a multiplication of the first fundamental. This is that boxy tone. Okay, it's in this frequency range. So if I cut out the second harmonic, I'm actually getting rid of that boxy tone. If I boost that section, it becomes more boxy and sounds like this. So sometimes all you have to do is find the second harmonic of a sound that usually starts around 100 hertz and just pull it down to where it's not conflicting with the first harmonic. It's similar to music. I'm going to get a little advanced here, but when I play a minor chord, and I play a major chord, the only difference between a minor chord and a major chord is that is the third. A minor third is 3 semitones up from the root. A major third is 4 semitones up from the root note. That's the only way I can understand the difference between a minor and a major note. Okay, excuse me, a major chord. So what happens if we take out, I'm saying metaphorically, the third, or take out the thing that, now, and I'm getting really advanced, you could take out the fifth and it's still considered a minor. So we still know this is a sawtooth. My metaphor is that we can take out frequencies, but we still perceive it as a sawtooth. That's my really advanced metaphor. So don't be afraid to take out harmonics, because you could still get the image of a sound without collapsing the entire perception of the sound. Okay, so this is the again, static EQ, hard cuts, hard boost that just stay there unless you automate them and move them around. Now, with EQ, let's just get into what frequency means. So there's an app. Let me see if I have it on here. Actually, we could do a little virtual experiment. So what I want you to do is put on your headphones or your speakers, and I want you to, as this thing takes all day to load, I'm going to pause the video so it loads. Okay, it looks like we're back. Okay, so in Absynth, actually, let me pause it again. All right, so in Absynth, what I can do is I'm playing a tone in the background. What I'll do is a quick experiment that you usually do in school. I did this way in my college days. We did it with an oscillator. What we're going to do in Absynth 5 is go through the frequencies. Now, the question I want to ask you, let's go big screen on this one. The question I want to ask you is, which frequencies do you hear loud? Which frequencies sound louder? Okay, so as I go through this oscillator, we're going to go from low frequencies, 10 hertz, stuff you can't even technically hear in the human ear. We're going to go up 20 hertz, 200 hertz, 300 hertz, 500 hertz, 2000 hertz. And then we're going to go up past 20K, 20 kilohertz. And I want you to just say which frequencies are louder and which frequencies can I even hear, or can't I hear them? And this will go into what's called the Fletcher-Munson curve, which I'll pull up later. Hopefully I remember. But we'll get to what's the Fletcher-Munson curve in a little bit after this experiment to help you understand why we boost and cut the way we do. Okay, so let's hit play on this one. Okay, I was wondering why I couldn't hear it. It's because it's so low of a frequency. So we're at 2 hertz right now. So as I move this up, you'll start to hear the frequency come in. So you're not going to hear anything until we hit about 20 hertz. It's very subtle, but it's there. Most of us, if you have headphones, can hear this rumble right here at 40. Now we're at 70. Notice it's getting louder. We're not changing the volume, but the sound feels louder. And I'll show you why. Doesn't it feel like it keeps getting louder? Nothing's changing except the frequency. It keeps getting louder and louder and louder. Sounds like we tripled the volume. We didn't do anything. You're like, ow, how much louder can it go? I'm going to move quickly through these. Super loud, super loud, super loud, super loud. Then it goes, what happened to the frequency? It was loud. Why is the frequency, if we pull it up, it doesn't get louder? No. And now we're past 20K. You can't even hear the frequency. Okay, so the goal of that is to show you that our ear hears frequencies completely differently, depending on which frequency it is. Sometimes if it's low, we hear it very subtly. If it's in the mid-range, we hear it loudly. That's why a lot of mixing engineers say the mix lives in the mids. It lives between 500 and 5 kilohertz. I'll show you exactly why that is with what's called the Fletcher-Munson curve. And that simple experiment should show you I didn't change anything. Again, a quick recap. All I did was raise the volume from here upward. I didn't change the volume, the panning, or anything. It's just the frequencies, certain frequencies we perceive as louder because of the way our ear is built. So let's get into why that is. This here is called the Fletcher-Munson curve. What we experienced and what you just saw from raw data is that the low frequencies, you couldn't hear them, which means I have to turn them up in volume for you to hear them. So there's a certain threshold to where if I just turned up that 50 hertz high enough, you'd be like, oh, there it is. But it was so quiet, I would have to turn it up to match how loud those other frequencies were. So this curve is saying how much basically you have to turn something up for us to actually perceive it as loud. I'll say loud. Okay, so we have to turn up bass a lot before we even perceive it. And as you see, it's like this slow climbing graph to where we get around 500 hertz. We don't have to turn up the volume anymore to really hear it at that type of loudness, I'll say. So from about 500 to about 5 kilohertz, whoops, I didn't mean to click off. From about 500 to about 5 kilohertz, we have a zone that really stands out, which means this looks inverted. But basically, if you flip this graph upside down and we just play everything that we just did, that will show you the volume that we perceive a sound as. So again, we started at 10 hertz. We could barely hear it. None of us could hear it. Then we started at 20 hertz. We slowly started to hear something. Then 40 hertz was a rumble. And then we went throughout the other frequencies. And if you invert this or flip it upside down, you will see that as I increased the volume, the perceived volume went up. Excuse me, as I increased the frequency, the perceived volume went up. Okay, and then it went really loud at about 5K, 8K, 10K, and then it just dropped off after that point. And this graph is showing you that. Okay, so this is the Fletcher-Munson curve. This is the reason why we don't have to boost 500 to 5K as hard as we have to boost the bass. Okay, so that's going to give you an understanding as to why we're boosting stuff the way we are and why we're cutting things the way we are. So now that you understand the Fletcher-Munson curve and you understand the frequency spectrum, okay, so you have the way our ears built for one, and then you understand harmonics. Now you can go into EQ understanding what the heck you're doing. Okay, it's not just this frivolous act of just boosting and cutting randomly. Now let's go into the DAW and put this to practice. Okay, so let's switch cams. Okay, now we're back in the DAW. I'm using a sawtooth to show you what's called subtractive EQ. This is going to be the first area that you need to get used to with EQ. Again, in the beginning, I used to boost a lot. I would boost the lows or boost the highs. That's fine to do. I'm not telling you not to do that. I'm just saying that you won't really understand EQ until you pull away or use subtractive EQ. So again, let's do that same technique. Let's get rid of that second harmonic because we don't need it. If I boost it, that's the frequency it gives me, this, and I don't need that in my beat. It just sounds unnecessary. So let's take out that frequency. Now notice the visual of the hill is going down as I pull this down in volume. So most people think if they cut it at, what is this, 4 dB, that it's completely gone. It's not completely gone. It's still there. It's just lower in perception. There's a book called, don't give me a quote in books. Actually, before I quote that book, I'll make sure I have the exact data before I even bring the book up. Okay, so let's turn this down. But basically, it's a book that shows you that every certain amount of dB, the volume goes to half the perception. So if it starts at normal perception, if I pull it down a certain amount of dB, it's now half that perception. I'm going to get that exact value before I speak on it. Okay, so let's pull this down. Now my serum feels more boomy. I didn't add anything. All I'm doing is taking away that second harmonic, and listen to how the sawtooth feels more boomy. It feels like I increased the bass even though I didn't do anything but take something away. Now you don't have to be this extreme with your EQ. You just need to understand how a sound is built as far as fundamentals. Remember, over here on the left, that's the first fundamental. Then that second hill is the second harmonic. Third hill is the third harmonic, and it just multiplies all the way up. Now, different sounds have different harmonics, even and odd. You don't need to memorize this. The point is to understand that we're EQing out certain sections of a sound to rid fundamentals in general to change the tone of a sound. Now what we could do is boost up the lows. Now notice how I'm not boosting directly at that specific frequency, but it's affecting that frequency because of the gradient or the bandwidth, how wide that EQ curve is. It's actually affecting this frequency, but at a very subtle amount. So if I keep boosting this, it will slowly affect that fundamental frequency, but I had to boost this a lot. So what happens if I change this? Up top, you can left click and drag this in FL to change the shape of that specific point. Let's make this what's called a bell curve. So now it won't boost all the lows. The shape that we had before is called a low shelf. If you left click and drag this, it says a low shelf. And that means it's boosting everything below a certain point. That's called a low shelf shape. You don't need to memorize this, but just left click and change this to what's called a peak or a bell curve. So now when I pull this up, it zones in on a specific frequency range. And what I can also do is move the frequency with this knob in the bottom here. I can move it to more directly align with 100 hertz. Now remember, sound is not static. Sound moves. So let's say we move these notes around. Let me make this a little bit faster. So that's a realistic bass line. Now what happens is the fundamental, as I change notes, it moves from 100 hertz down to whatever, up to whatever, down to whatever. That's what frequency and notes are. They're different frequencies. So as I'm moving the notes, I'm actually moving the fundamental frequency. So that means I can't just EQ one frequency out. I need to EQ a majority of frequencies out if I want to affect all of the secondary harmonics of that bass line. Notice how this moved. I wish there was a way to pause it, but there isn't. So look quickly. The second harmonic actually drips down all the way to 146. So now I'm not doing the same effect I was doing before, where I was taking out the second harmonic. Now it's active in the second note. So the question is, how do you affect multiple areas? What we need to do is either increase the bandwidth of a certain section to affect more of the frequencies. But you might hear that it thins out the sound. So this is where we create what's called dynamic EQ to take care of certain sections only when they happen in a certain song. Now, I'm not going to get super advanced yet. I want to focus here on the second harmonic here. Let's pull this. Let's just redo the curve because I moved it. Okay, so we're at about 200 hertz. And then let's change what's called the bandwidth. This is the knob at the bottom, the bandwidth. This is how sharp or wide a curve is. So if I tighten the bandwidth, it tightens up the frequency. And then we can pull this down. Okay, so on that second note, if you listen closely, it still gets that boxy tone because the second harmonic is active in that second tone. So it goes from being non-boxy to boxy. And these are the small details that people don't understand. Now, there are certain EQs that actually follow what's called a fundamental isotope. I want to say, which one is it? Nectar or Isotope? I think it's a Nectar. It has a plugin that follows the fundamental. So as the notes move, it actually follows the fundamental to cut it out so you don't have to keep EQing everywhere. That would be the ideal EQ for this scenario because, again, that note keeps moving around. And that's why sometimes you'll make EQ moves, but you're wondering why your beat still sounds boxy in certain areas. Okay, so let's talk about the boost real quick. So this is also a clean EQ. This isn't adding harmonics. Certain analog EQs, when you boost them, they are adding harmonic content. So you're actually filling out the frequency content when you're making boosts. It's more than just the boost. Okay, so how can we take this to a different level? I'm going to show you this now because I want you to see how far you can take it. Now let's use the Pro Q. And what we're going to do here is just add a point, and we're going to click on this headphone zone. And here's where that boxy tone, this is where that boxy tone exists. I don't necessarily want that boxy tone. Now you can tighten what's called the bandwidth, but we're not going to worry about that just yet. So here, for a long time, I didn't see this. There's a range tab. The range tab will basically pull out volume to a degree you determine. So let's left click this little thing around the banner or around the knob, I meant to say, and pull this down. So let's say we want to pull out 6 dB at a certain specific point. Okay, so let's pull out 6 dB. Now I'm just showing you the advanced stuff you could do because this will show you the difference between dynamic and static. Static, remember, just focuses on one zone and it always cuts or always boosts that zone. What happens if we tell it to only pull out the volume when the notes are getting too heavy in a certain region? And that's why we're using dynamic EQ. So you can pull the dynamic range down. Let's tighten the Q so we're not affecting everything. And let's actually solo. I wish there was a quick way to solo as you're widening the Q, but let's do this. So now I'm going to sweep using my headphones to find that area where it's like this. Now 200 hertz, I don't want you to demonize 200 hertz. It can be a good frequency to boost on vocals too. But here's the frequency I don't like. 300, which is that third harmonic, but I also don't like the 200 spot. So what I want to do is affect both of those. So I'm going to widen the Q until we reach about 200 hertz, which we are right here. And then it fully affects 300 hertz. And then it also affects 500 hertz. So we're kind of chiseling out, but at a different gradient curvature. Now I can go in and set the parameters as to how I want this to react. So if I click this little arrow up top, I can set what's called a threshold. So if the sound goes above a certain dB level, or a loudness, I'll say, then the EQ will cut away 6 dB. So if I drag this down, you can hear it actually doing the work. So the yellow line is how much it's actually moving and cutting. The green line is what it can cut. Now the sound may sound thin, so now what I can do is move it around until I reach my sweet spot. Also, I want to mention that if you switch the phase here, you got to understand this. I don't understand the deep science of the different phase types for this one, but we want to keep it natural phase because that's 3 different phase types. Now, to exaggerate this effect, I'm going to widen the cue because for beginners, they need to hear stuff exaggerated. So I'm going to exaggerate for the beginners. Let's widen this out. Now, again, this is the potential range that I could affect. I'm not necessarily affecting it until that sound passes the threshold. And then the EQ does whatever I tell it to do. So in this case, it will pull out up to 6 dB of volume. So let's sweep the frequencies. So let's say your sound is too boomy. You can center this around the low frequencies and affect all those low notes without affecting everything else. This is why we would use a wider band and a dynamic band. Let's say it's too boomy. I could take out the more boomy section. I mean, too boxy, I meant to say. So as I sweep, it's harder to hear cuts than it is boosts. So let's make a dramatic cut here. Let's switch this curvature to a high shelf. This means it will affect, whoops, that's a high cut, excuse me, a high pass filter. That's not a high shelf. High shelf usually has like a little fork icon. So like this. So now what I'm doing is affecting all of the frequencies above a certain point. Now, if those frequencies pass a certain threshold that I set, it will pull down the EQ. And this helps you shape what's called tone or upper harmonic content. So I'm going to sweep using this EQ to show you the effect of this. This is different than filtering. I think this is the sweet spot for the sound that I want to create, around 400 hertz. Notice how it becomes more boxy. Okay, now like everything above about 10K. So what I'll do is I'll cut, instead of a high shelf, I'm going to move a little bit quicker here because this is just a personal setting and not a mandatory setting. Let's switch it to a bell curve. Let's widen out the range from about, what was it? I forgot. The frequency I like, was it 400? Something like this. And then let's add another point in here. Let's make this a high shelf and let's go in and boost it to bring back the sizzle of the sound. And also let's boost the lows. So basically scooping out the middle part of the sound. Now we've changed the tone completely. I wish there was an easier way to change the curvature of this zone right here, but oh, you can. Here we go. Okay, so I'm changing the way it scoops out the volume. Notice if I tighten it up, it gets more boxy. Sometimes you want that little boxy tone just to add a little body to the sound. You don't want it to be completely bodiless. So here's without. And here's what I want to show you is the wave candy. So you can see visually what's happening to the harmonics. So let's do this in real time. I'm going to drag this over here. So here's without the EQ. I want you to take a look at those horizontal lines and how the color of them. Now you'll see it got a little more dense. I'm not sure if that picks up on camera, but the top end got a little more red and the bottom end, you see it got a little darker. Let's do that again. Now, sometimes people are trying to add frequencies that just aren't there. This sound sounds cool, but it just doesn't have that sub rumble. So I mentioned before what's called the fundamental frequency. Let's switch cams over to the big cam. So I mentioned that fundamental frequency sits at the bottom of a sound. This is the lowest frequency the sound generates. And then you have, harmonics, which are multiples of that fundamental frequency. So some sounds have the lowest point at, let's say, 100 hertz. It doesn't have anything below 100 hertz. So you could boost you till tears. You could boost 20 hertz, 60 hertz. Nothing's going to happen because nothing exists below 100 hertz. So what you need to do is add additional information underneath 100 hertz. This is where sub bass comes into play, or an 808 bass drum. And this is where you would do that complexity. Okay, so I'm just trying to help you understand that EQ doesn't necessarily pull out stuff that isn't there. What I would have to do in that case to make the sound thicker is add another oscillator. And I would have to tell it to be a sine wave in this case and be 2 octaves lower. Or 1, let's do 1. And now we have that frequency content below the 100 hertz. Let me turn off oscillator A. And some of you can hear that, some of you can't. So let's open up the EQ. And now you can see the bass lives, what frequency is this here? The bass lives at about 50 hertz and below. So remember, the sawtooth doesn't exist at 50 hertz. Okay, the lowest frequency it had was 100 hertz. Okay, we went all the way down to about 60 hertz on that. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you is that if you want to thicken up a sound, sometimes you can't EQ it in. That's my main lesson for this portion. And the easiest way to add in sub content or frequency content in the low end is to add a sine wave, pardon me, because a sine wave is only one frequency. It's not a square wave or a sawtooth where it has all these frequencies in there that will clutter up the sound. If you just want bass to be added, look into adding a sine wave to the sound. You could do this in addition to other music. So if you have like a kick drum and it's just not full enough, add a sine wave underneath the kick drum and lower the octave. It will fill out those lows. So now when I go to EQ, sometimes you don't even need the boost at the bottom because you already have the kick. Now there's now I wish I had more time to go through the frequencies one by one, but the secret frequency is the boost. 60 hertz adds that rumble to your car, like that car shake feel. 70 adds the car shake feel. 100 hertz is more of a bass, like it's a bass feel, but it's not a rumble feel. 200 is a more full bottom end feel, but it's not bassy. It's more boxy. But for vocals, it can really round out a vocal. It's body. I'll call it body. 400 is also body. It can be a clutter zone. So from about, why am I like trying to describe this with my hands? Let me just show you. Okay, so let's use EQ2 just to make this simple. And this needs to get out the way. Okay, so from here to where we at? 60 hertz around here. Some people say 50. I found that it's 60 in my car. Okay, so around 60 hertz, this is where you get the rumble in the car. This is where you get the vibration. 70 hertz is also a secret frequency for that. 100 hertz gives you more like, again, bass tone, but it's not rumbly. Then 200 gives you that top end of the bass, that boxy, like this kind of tone. But sometimes it could be good for vocals. 400 also gives you like this boxy tone, but again, sometimes it could be good. I don't want to demonize these frequencies. What else is a key? 600 to 800 hertz is about a more nasally type sound for most people. You also want to take care of that because that can be where a lot of resonance buildup. Speaking of resonance buildup, I'm glad I mentioned that because in Pro Q, what you can do, let's open up another one, is what you can do is hold your arrow at the bottom right here. So if I keep talking, it will read the frequencies and it will show me where my frequencies have a lot of resonance, it's called. So I have a lot of nasal energy around 505. So if I pull this down, it's getting rid of that nasal energy. Now I'm exaggerating this so you can hear it. But once you get rid of that nasal energy, now if I boost it, you can hear that now I'm exaggerating. But it sounds very like ringy and just unnecessary, okay? Because I'm boosting it so much. So I can cut that out and it will change the tone of the sound. So this graph is showing me where frequencies are building up. And most of the time they'll build up around 800 or 700 hertz. A lot of buildup happens around 3K for a lot of female and male vocals when they're singing. And a lot of buildup happens around 250 to about 500 hertz Okay, so again, I know I'm moving quickly here, but 60 to 70 hertz secrets for making your car vibrate. Maybe I'll make a chart or something that you guys can have. What was I saying here? 100 is the bass tone. 200 is the um, like boomy part of the audio. 500 is like the punchy part of the kick. 400 is like a boxy tone, but sometimes you need it for vocals. 700 is usually where you get that nasally kind of tone. 1 to 2K is this is where you can actually, let me do this on my vocal. Why am I sitting here explaining this and not doing it? Duh. Okay, let's do this for the third time. Okay, so the boominess, this is if you want that radio ready voice, you boost up your low end right here. And remember, you would need to boost heavier because our ear can't hear bass as easily as it can hear other stuff. So sometimes you would have to boost this pretty heavy to even hear a difference. Okay, so this is how you get that radio low end that's shaking your car here at busyworksbeats.com. I need you to go ahead and not turn that dial. Okay, so that's the radio effect. Then you have 100 hertz, which is, I wish I had a bass guitar ready, but I don't. So this is more of usually the fundamental frequency of, in this case, a male voice. Okay, so that's where you get that fundamental frequency if you want to boost that up. 200 hertz in this case is going to be that boxy tone. So it's more of that type of sound. You have to ask, do you need that perception of the room or do you not need that? In this case, we don't need that. It doesn't add anything. It just makes it warm for no reason. I don't want a warm sound. So I'm going to cut that. Okay. And that's boost up the lows to give us a radio ready type voice. Now, this is not an EQ by any means because I already have another EQ doing stuff. Also, what I meant to mention with EQ is for vocals, most of the time you have what's called a high pass filter or a low cut, which gets rid of all the frequencies. Because if I have my EQs off, and you'll hear this a lot with other YouTubers, they don't do this. So when they rumble their mic or like hit their desk, you hear all that rumble in your microphone, in your headphones. And that's annoying. People don't like that. So you want to cut out that frequency. That's really low frequency stuff. Let me turn off my first EQ. So here's what the EQ sounds like just by itself. Okay, so I notice how I have that radio ready sound, that low frequency boosted sound. It's exaggerated, but it's rounded because again, lows need to be boosted a little bit harder than the highs to really be perceived. And this is how you get the car to shake. Remember, the goal of a radio show is to have their frequencies rumble the car so that you're engaged more. They want you to feel the audio quite literally by shaking the car. And that happens around these lower frequencies. Notice how I'm boosting 80 to about 60 hertz, somewhere around there. Again, this low cut, you can switch what's called a dB per octave. This changes the harshness of the curvature. I'm going to move this to be about, let's say 50 hertz. It's just cutting off that rumble again. So if I hit my desk, you're not hearing all this excess rumble. There's no, okay. So I'm cutting out because we don't need so I'm cutting that boxy tone. Now around 400 is again where you find body in most vocals. My vocal's a little bit deeper than others, so this is what my 400 sounds like. My 400 sounds like more like a whiny, resonant-y sound. So I don't really need this. It doesn't add anything to the vocal. I don't need to overly cut, but it doesn't add anything either. So what I'm going to do is set this to be dynamic. You don't need to do this. I'm just going to make it dynamic so that if it gets overwhelming, then it will cut back. But I'm going to leave it as natural unless it gets overwhelming. And that way we could do that. So you can pull the range down right here. Let's pull it down to about 3 dB. So if it ever gets overclawing, you could pull that back. Now here, do we make a cut? So here, yeah, we made a hard cut, but I'm also going to make this dynamic as well. So it's a cut and it's dynamic, which means if it goes past a certain point, it's not only cut, but if there's more energy that I missed, it will also pull this down 3 dB. Sometimes you want to pull it harder. In this case, it's not a performance take, so we don't need to make it super clean. Okay, so from here, where are we at? 400 hertz is our dynamic curvature. Is this turned on? Oh, that was from earlier. I think that was from earlier. Okay, so we're at 400 hertz. Okay, let's keep sweeping here. So let's notice now what I'm going to do to be fair is widen the bandwidth so that we're perceiving more than just that frequency. Okay, so now you can hear this is that nasally part of my voice. It's that nasally, that type of sound. So again, not necessarily pleasant. So I'm going to pull this down and make this dynamic. Everybody has a different approach. I'm going to make mine dynamic because I want it to be there, but if it gets overwhelming, I want to pull it out. And that's the difference between a dynamic EQ and a static EQ. Static EQs force you to either pull it all the way out or boost. Okay, let's keep going here. Now we're around 1K. or once you reach 1000 hertz, we call it K. So K stands for 1000. So 1K, 1 kilohertz. That's where I get more of the presence of the vocal. I like that. Let's keep sweeping. Okay, so 2K, I'm getting a lot of that presence in the vocal. Doesn't sound bad, sounds good. So I want to boost both 2K and 1K. So how do I boost those both? But before we get to the answer, let me show you more. So 3K is usually where I have a lot of. You notice that's that build-up sound. So this is where I want to take care of. So I'm going to set this to be dynamic, and I want to pull it out about 3 dB. So if it gets overwhelming, it will take care of that zone. Now in this case, I want to make sure the bandwidth is not super wide because I just want to take care of 3K to about 4K. That's where it gets very heavy sometimes with resonance. Okay, so let's keep sweeping. Sounds very bitey and very present. Is it present? I was trying to say it without the filter. Okay. And then you get into like the granular high frequencies. Okay, so what I want to do is boost from 1K to 2K and then also boost 10K up. So let's make a bell curve to boost in general. Now I'm making a cut and a boost at the same exact time. So I'm boosting my vocal at from about 600 hertz all the way up to about 4K. But also if the frequency gets too heavy around 3K, it's pulling down. So I'm boosting and cutting at the same exact time. And this will help you boost an area you like, but also take care of a problem frequency. And then what I can do is just create one last thing. I'm going to call this a high shelf, and I can boost this to create that sizzle in my vocal and open the vocal up to make it sound really tall. When you have speakers, you'll understand this. High frequencies just seem like they're higher in the room. Lower frequencies feel like they're lower in the room. So this will literally open up the image of a vocal to make it feel taller by adding this high frequency here. So this is a quick curvature of what you can do. Now here's before. This is the before vocal. Now my vocal is pretty clean because I don't have a lot going on. I have a Shure SM7B and it has this thing around it, which prevents a lot of the background noise. So I'm not trying to fix a lot of error going in. I'm just trying to enhance and take away stuff that I don't like about the voice and not the environment. Because when you're recording both your voice and your environment. So now with the EQ on, I just have certain things exaggerated and certain things pulled back. So now you get a different type of tone going into my voice. And then from here, you would add it through your compressor or do the compressor first and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's why EQ. So again, here's without, here's with no EQ profile. Here's with my EQ profile. I sound like a radio voice because I have enhanced and taken away certain things. Now without, I just sound like whatever. Okay, so with EQ, you can shape what's called the tone. And that's the goal of the EQ. I think I've given you guys a lot to chew on. If you want to learn more, go to premium.busyworksbeats.com to learn more. We have a bunch of free courses and you can learn a lot. And just go to premium.busyworksbeats.com. I'll leave a link below. Don't worry. If you're new here, subscribe. We're trying to reach 1 million subscribers. Like the video, share the video with your friends. If I missed anything, let me know in the comments. We'll continue this series. This is just video 1 of a free mixing course series for you. Thank you for watching. It's Game from busyworksbeats.com. Peace.